وين هي الدولة اللبنانية ترد؟ وين هي؟
Good afternoon and thank you for joining us on FutureTV. I'm Linda Tamim and these are today's top stories. Prime Minister-designate Tamam Salam reiterates his call for a cabinet of national interest and says the security situation in the country demands the government be formed swiftly. 6 shells from the Syrian side of the border hit towns in Akkad, north of Lebanon. And the Friends of Syria gather in Doha, Qatar, and urge Lebanon to end its involvement in the Syrian conflict. Prime Minister-designate Tamam Salam reiterates his call for a cabinet of national interest and says the security situation in the country demands the government be formed swiftly. Following talks with President Michel Sleiman at Baghdad Palace over the cabinet formation process, Salam says the nature of the government he is seeking falls under the title of the nation's interests and not the interest of a certain group or political force. The Beirut MP said he was still seeking a 24-member cabinet in which there is an equal distribution of ministerial portfolios between the March 8, March 14 and centrist camps. He also repeated that he opposed granting veto power to any group in the next cabinet. Salam says the focus should be on the efficiency of the cabinet rather than its form, adding that he favors a government of non-political partisans. 6 shells from the Syrian side of the border have hit towns in Akkad, north of Lebanon. Sources say the shelling hit the Akkad border towns of El-Dababiye and Al-Noura, causing panic among residents and causing only material damages. The sources said Lebanese soldiers helped residents evacuate to a safer location once the shelling began in the early hours of this morning. The conflict between Syrian rebels and forces loyal to President Bashar al-Assad has frequently spilled over to Lebanon. President Michel Sleiman has sent memos to both the United Nations and the Arab League to help end the violations to Lebanese territory caused by the fighting between the Syrian rivals. Foreign Minister Adnan Mansour has denied that the Lebanese expats in the Gulf are subjected to a mass extradition campaign, calling on the media to report accurately the news. He pointed out that the Saudi ambassador to Lebanon, Ali Awad Asiri, said that the Gulf Cooperation Council states will extradite any foreigner, whether Lebanese or from another nationality, if the person violates the immigration rules in the JCC countries. Asked about the expulsion of at least 18 Lebanese citizens from Qatar after the Gulf Cooperation Council pledged to act against members of Hezbollah, Mansour ruled out that the Gulf state has targeted a specific sect. On June the 10th, the GCC said it will implement measures affecting the residency permits and financial and commercial transactions of Hezbollah in response to the group's involvement in the conflict in Syria. Syria's army has pressed a fierce assault launched 4 days ago against rebel areas in northeastern Damascus, killing 3 children with mortar fire. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says the districts of Kaboun in northeastern Damascus is being intensely shelled by regime forces. Watchdog added that clashes also raged between rebel troops and pro-Assad militiamen in the Barzi neighborhood of the capital. It said the fighting erupted as rebels fought off an army attempt to enter the district. Battles were also reported on the edges of Al-Hajar al-Aswad in southern Damascus and Jubat in the east. The military also pushed on with its bid to end the insurgency in and around Damascus in Homs in central Syria. Foreign ministers of governments that support the Syrian opposition call on Lebanon to halt the involvement of any party in the conflict in the neighboring country, Syria. Foreign ministers of the Friends of Syria group are gathering in Doha, the Qatari capital, to discuss how to organize the delivery of military and other kinds of aid for Syrian rebels. The talks are being attended by foreign ministers from the 11 countries making up the core of the pro-rebel alliance, including France, the United States, Britain, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. Qatar's prime minister says sending weapons to Syrian rebels is the only way to achieve peace in Syria's case. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says that supporters of the Syrian opposition will step up military and other aid in a bid to end an imbalance on the ground in President Bashar al-Assad's favor. Kerry says the U.S. remains committed to a peace plan that includes a conference in Geneva and a transitional government picked both by Assad and the opposition. British Foreign Secretary William Hague defined the talks as an opportunity to coordinate the thinking and action of the 11-state group.
It's frustrating is putting it mildly that this has gone on for 2.5 years. Now 100,000 people or so have been killed. Millions are in desperate humanitarian need. And at the moment this crisis is on a worse trajectory. It is set to get worse. And as I said last week, I don't want to understate the severity of it and the bleakness of it. But what we do have here is countries working together, United States, Britain, other European countries, Turkey, Arab countries. We're trying to help the Syrian people promote a political solution and make sure that the space is open in the future for a political solution. We would need to make a success of Geneva II, both the regime and the opposition to be ready to be there and agree on a transitional government with full executive authority. And supporting in various ways the national coalition, the opposition, is absolutely crucial to Geneva II. There will not be a successful Geneva Conference, there will never be a successful political process unless the Assad regime understand they cannot eliminate by force the opposition. So supporting the opposition in the ways that I've described is very much part of promoting a successful political process.
A human rights investigator says increasing the flow of weapons to Syria's government and rebel forces will most likely cause an increase in war crimes in a 2-year-old civil war that has killed more than 93,000 people. The chair of the UN Commission of Inquiry on Syria, Paulo Pinheiro, said in a report to the Human Rights Council in Geneva that his team had reasonable grounds to believe that limited amounts of chemical weapons had been used in Syria.
We told the distinguished members of the Council that Syria is in free fall. Crimes that shock the conscience have become a reality daily in Syria. Humanity has been the casualty of this war. This is the price of the international collective failure to end this conflict. What we say is that delivering arms engage in responsibility of those who deliver the arms because the people who will receive those arms could commit war crimes and gross human rights violations. That is very important to have this in account when arms are being delivered. Those arms will contribute to the escalation of war crimes and gross human rights violations. I think we have to go.
Coming up next, bright umbrellas serve as a warning to New Yorkers about the dangers of too much sun exposure. Stay with us for more. Welcome back. Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi has repeated a call for dialogue with the opposition in an attempt to mitigate deep political divisions ahead of planned rallies later this month calling for his resignation. The interview comes a day after tens of thousands of Morsi supporters massed in Cairo in a show of strength ahead of the opposition protests planned for June the 30th. Egypt is deeply polarized. Morsi's supporters say he is clearing institutions of decades of corruption, but his critics accuse him of concentrating powers in the hands of his Muslim Brotherhood movement. Sources say there is much anticipation and anxiety ahead of the June 30th protests, with fear of violence and instability. Officials at Cairo airport say security patrols will be increased, passengers will be thoroughly checked, and new cameras will be installed to monitor and confront any emergency. Italy's 3 largest labor unions have joined together in Rome to demonstrate against rising unemployment and unfair taxes. Organizers from the unions of CGIL, CISL, and UIL expected around 200,000 people to join in the 2 marches through the center of Rome and attend final rallies. Workers and activists began to gather early in the morning, arriving on nearly 1,500 buses and 10 trains from all over Italy and ships from Sardinia. Labor reforms, approved under Prime Minister Mario Monti after long negotiations with trade unions and political parties, slightly eased firing restrictions on regular workers while curbing the use of the temporary contracts often used to hire young people. The reforms were widely criticized by unions and employers, and as Italy's longest post-war recession had dragged on, the jobless rate has risen steadily. Unemployment among young people under the age of 24 now stands at an all-time record of more than 40%. Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff promises to hold a dialogue with members of a protest government sweeping the country. She also condemned the acts of violence and vandalism and says she will do whatever is necessary to maintain order. Rousseff has unveiled a series of reforms in an attempt to end days of nationwide protests against public transport and health care, corruption, and the billions of dollars of spending on World Cup preparations. In a televised address on Friday, she said she had an obligation to listen to the voices on the streets, but dialogue needed to be established after nearly 2 weeks of massive protests. The Brazilian president said that her government will create a national plan for public transportation in cities. She also reiterated her backing for a plan before Congress to invest all oil revenue royalties in education, and a promise she already made to bring in foreign doctors to areas that lack physicians. President Barack Obama has nominated Jim Comey to be the next director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI, picking a former Justice Department official whom he says has deep experience in the U.S. battle against terrorism. If confirmed by the Senate, Comey, a Republican, will replace FBI Director Robert Mueller, who has led the agency since just before the September 11 attacks. Mueller is expected to step down this fall. And now for news around the world in brief. At least 4 people are feared dead in Canada's Alberta province, and nearly 100,000 people have been forced to flee their homes after days of flooding. Schools in Calgary City were closed, and the military sent in 12 helicopters and 1,200 troops to help clear more than 24 neighborhoods as heavy rains caused the Bow and Elbow rivers in western Canada to overflow their banks. Electricity was cut in some parts of the city, and several roads and bridges were closed to traffic. Rescuers have found bodies in the river Ganges and the muddy, broken earth left by landslides, raising the death toll from monsoon flooding in mountainous northern India to nearly 600. The Air Force dropped paratroopers, food and medicine for people trapped in up to 100 towns and villages cut off since Sunday in the Himalayan state of Uttarakhand, where thousands of people are stranded. Haze from fires in Indonesia have enveloped Singapore with high pollution levels in one of the Southeast Asia's worst air pollution crises. The pollution standards index edged to 326, a level considered hazardous. Whipped up by winds, the Indonesia blazes added to fears over health problems and diplomatic tension in Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Indonesia has earmarked around $20 million to handle the disaster. Japan's Mount Fuji was announced as a World Cultural Heritage Site in Cambodia by the UNESCO World Heritage Committee. In Japan, many locals see the mountain as a spiritual place and say the recognition of Mount Fuji is a source of pride. Mount Fuji brings Japan's total of World Heritage Sites up to 17. 100 bright orange, yellow, and white umbrellas hovered over Madison Square Park in Manhattan, New York City. The event, called Parasols of Protection, is an effort to offer passers-by protection from the sun and to serve as a warning about the dangers of too much sun exposure. On this first day of summer, skincare company La Roche-Posay offered free skin cancer screenings from dermatologists and handed out free sunscreen. Angela Bennett, La Roche-Posay vice president, said as a rule, everyone should wear 1 ounce of sunscreen, to cover the entire body, reapply sunscreen after 2 hours in the sun, get yearly skin cancer screenings, and seek shade if necessary.
Sunscreen is important for everyday use because we see that 1 in 5 Americans are affected by skin cancer. And it's a reality, and if you know someone close to you who has been affected, you can't help but ask yourself, was there something we could have done to prevent this? And in most cases, the answer is yes. It's very simple.
Well, we have hot and sunny days coming ahead, so make sure you apply sunscreen throughout the summer. And on that note, we end our bulletin for today. Now, let me remind you of our headlines. Prime Minister-designate Tamam Slam reiterates his call for a cabinet of national interest and says the security situation in the country demands the government be formed swiftly. 6 shells from the Syrian side of the border hit towns in Akkad, north of Lebanon. And finally, the Friends of Syria gather in Doha, Qatar, and urge Lebanon to end its involvement in the Syrian conflict. That's it from me and the news team here at Future Television. We'll be back again tomorrow for more updates. Till then, enjoy your weekend.
وين هي الدولة اللبنانية تتردد؟